By way of summarizing this lecture where we have looked at sensor characteristics, I thought I would just talk about how you would go about choosing a sensor for a particular application. Okay. Um, let's, for simplicity, take a pressure sensor. Okay. So, if you want to select a pressure sensor, what you would want to know is what are the kinds of pressures that you want to measure. And if you know the pressures that you want to measure, you can go to the market and find out sensors which have pressures in the particular, and they can measure the pressure in the range that you want to measure, right? So that would be the first thing to do. But also, uh, and how would you know that? The way you know that is by looking at the static characteristics of the pressure sensors. So people would have, the manufacturers of the sensors would have characterized the sensors, and they would tell you if you can have this sensor would work for from this pressure to that to another value. This is the range of the sensor, and in this range, this is how the calibration curve looks like. They will give you parameters like how accurate the sensor is and how precise the sensor is. They will tell you what the sensitivity of the sensor is and what the resolution of the sensor is, and you will have to figure out, is this does the sensor have enough resolution? What is the minimum pressure that I want to measure? Um, um, and then decide whether to buy the sensor or not. You may also have to look at the dynamic characteristics of the sensor, because the pressure that you may be wanting to measure is not a constant pressure but a changing pressure. In that case, you will have to look at the dynamic characteristics. Is it okay to have a delay between the pressure change and your measurement? How much delay can you tolerate? Those would be some of the questions that you would ask. Uh, what would happen if there is a sudden change in pressure, as we were looking at? Would there be oscillations at the output? And would those oscillations be all right for you to have? Those are some of the questions you will have to ask. And as you look at the static and the dynamic characteristics of your sensor, depending on what your application of the sensor is going to be, you will be able to choose a sensor. Uh, my guess is that as you keep looking at uh, choosing a sensor for a particular application, this becomes much more easier for you. And one of the ways of practicing it would be to think of an application, go to a website which sells sensors, and look at the data sheets of sensors and see what kind of information do they give. And do they give you all the information that you need to use the sensor, or are there some cases where the information is missing and you have to do the relevant characterizations? In fact, one of the exercises after this lecture is precisely that. I'm going to ask you to choose a sensor, go and look at a datasheet, and see whether you have all the characteristics that you require for using the sensor.